I noticed that the older folks, when I say older, I mean probably over 70, were really struggling. And some of the agents were treating them as if they were 25 years old. With change being so difficult as we get older, I could see that they really needed more attention. It was much more emotional, and things needed to be, I think, laid out in a timely fashion, but not 100 miles an hour.
Right.
I think having that conversation with them initially, figuring out their preferences. No one wants to have the conversation. No one wants to have that discussion. It's really unfortunate how hard it is to have that discussion and have them go, they'll shut down because they aren't ready. They want to stay where they are. And it makes it really tough to ask those questions. But if you can get any kind of preference, because otherwise, like Courtney said, it turns into an emergency, which is not ideal. But it is the vast majority of people that we assist.
As our population and communities age, our parents and grandparents worry about losing their independence and worrying about running out of money as life expectancies continue to grow. Today's Smart Start podcast, brought to you by the Equitable Bank, will address these challenges with our guests, covering the different living options for our family members. In this segment, we're joined by Bruce Nemovitz, a seasoned senior real estate specialist with over 35 years of experience. Bruce brings a wealth of knowledge and compassion to the table, guiding seniors and their families through the transition to new living arrangements. Welcome, Bruce, to the Smart Start podcast.
Thank you for having me here.
Absolutely.
It means a lot to me.
Absolutely. And Bruce, you and I, before we went live here, we were talking about, you were head and shoulders above anybody else, you and your wife, in terms of identifying the need for seniors selling their homes and finding new homes. So kudos to you. I believe you've helped over, in the 30 some odd years you've worked there, or have been have targeted this audience specifically. I believe you've helped over 3,000 clients.
Probably closer to 4.
Closer to 4,000.
Yeah.
That's absolutely absolutely incredible. Tell me, what do you think differentiates the senior from the traditional home seller?
Well, I first believe that the reason I got into this niche was because I would go on calls into somebody's home thinking of selling their home. And I noticed that the older folks, when I say older, I mean probably over 70, were really struggling. And some of the agents were treating them as if they were 25 years old. With change being so difficult as we get older, I could see that they really needed more attention. It was much more emotional, and things needed to be, I think, laid out in a timely fashion, but not 100 miles an hour,
right,
as a younger person would like to go. One of the stories I can tell that kind of really got me into this, I went on a listing appointment, and I recall there was a mother and a daughter, and I walked in, and there had been a realtor in just before me, and the daughter said, thank God you're here. The last realtor never looked at my mother, who was the owner, and she only looked at me and asked me, when can I have her out of the house? While the mother was sitting there, as if she was the furniture. And at that point, I realized that, these folks really need much more attention, and they've paid their dues. They've kept up the house, and it's not easy to leave a home you've been in for 50 years. So that's why I started this niche, so that we could give them the attention they deserve. We have all the companies that can help them. So basically, we're a one-stop shop, you could say, to help them, but it's much more emotional.
Yeah. Well, and it's even the fact, and I don't know if there's a person out there who hasn't somehow been touched, whether it's a family member, a friend, a neighbor, who's been touched by it. And I think my personal challenge in working with my mother, who's now into assisted living, was just the loss of independence. If you could speak a little bit about that, because that's one of the things that I think is truly the challenge. Is here I am, I've made it to this life, and it's almost a transition as the family, the children are now taking care of the family member. So anything you can share with your experience on that?
This sort of ties into your last question,
Yeah.
why I got into this. And one of the things that I try to help folks with my seminars and getting them out while they're independent is that we can get them the information they need and so that they can understand exactly what's needed to make that move, because people feel like they just can't do it. The downsizing, they've accumulated all of these things. And so what we try to get them to do is avoid crisis management. Now, crisis management leads into what you just said. So now they've waited too long, and now the kids are helping them. And the last thing any of us want is loss of independence.
Right.
So now the kids are involved. Then that's a whole nother story, because I wrote 2 books about this. The first book was moving in the right direction for the senior. The second was guiding our parents in the right direction for the family, helping mom and dad. I did that because as I got into it more and more, I was talking to more and more family members. Well, that I can write my 3rd book about, because the family dynamics that can go on are incredible, because you have the children who will have, these issues with each other many
Their own
times.
agenda.
Sibling rivalry, on and
Sure.
on and on. So each of the kids have a little different idea what should be good for
Yeah.
mom and dad. And so now to navigate all of that, plus having to find the community, make sure mom's in the right place, is really daunting. So 90% of what I do is to help folks avoid that situation.
Now, when you're looking for a facility, I mean, sometimes it's not necessarily a facility. Maybe they're just downsizing into a condo, or maybe it's getting into an apartment.
Right.
You help in any of those things, with any of those things. I guess, how do you determine in terms of what are the specific needs in terms of finding the new living arrangements for your borrowers, or your borrowers,
I
your
would
buyers?
I would say in most cases,
Yeah.
when they come to us, they sort of know that I, the senior, or the children I'm talking to, mom, is looking to move to a senior community.
Okay.
I would say 90% of everyone we deal with moves into a senior community or in a senior apartment.
Okay.
Every now and then we get a few moving into a condo, but that would be, in our current stage, would be the younger baby boomers right now
Okay.
who would want to then buy a condo, probably in their 60s,
Okay.
maybe late 50s, early 70s. So most of the folks I deal with are moving to a senior apartment or community. Finding the right place is very challenging. I just did a survey about that, asking folks, what would you be looking for in a senior community?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the majority of the people wanted a continuum of care, and there are certain communities. You have to understand the dynamics in senior communities. One is independent living, one is assisted care living, then there's hospice,
Mm-hmm.
then there's dementia care
Right.
or memory care, then there's nursing home. So when people make the move, they'll usually say to me, I really don't want to move again. I'll do it this time,
Right.
and I want to go to a place where I don't then have to move to another place.
Right.
And so that would determine which communities we would be looking at. I work with all of the senior communities, so I know which ones are independent, which ones are assisted, how wide the hallways are. I mean, these are all factors, and of course, the financial part.
Yeah. Geographically, do you try to keep them close to their current residence, or does that sometimes not? Obviously, that might not always be the case. Closer to a family member who maybe have power of attorney or have some sort of healthcare power of attorney for them, things of that nature. Are those also considerations?
So you mentioned the words like, do you kind of guide them where they should go? And no, we don't do that.
Yeah.
They usually have either they've sought out and visited different communities,
Okay.
looked at condos. If it's somebody who's just in the beginning stages, I can refer them to folks where their entire business is helping place them into the right community based on their finances and health.
And let's just talk about, matching you up with a potential seller. They're a family that's looking to sell, either themselves and or a family member helping them. what are some of the things, the first questions they should be asking when they're interviewing a realtor? If it's yourself or somebody else, what should be some of the questions they're asking specifically? You gave some of the examples at
Mhm.
the outset, but are there specific things they should be asking right out front?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I hear usually when I walk into a home of a senior, as I mentioned, when I say senior, I'm talking about the average is probably 78 to
Sure.
90.
Okay.
And the first thing we'll be talking about is the emotional aspect, which we
Sure.
discussed
Yep.
earlier. But what they want to know is who's going to help me with the stuff. That's what I hear in every house I walk into. The kids are terrified. They don't know where it's all going to go. So the good news, I have several partners that will facilitate that. They're honest. We, only use people that we know that do a great job and charge reasonably. They'll come in. One of the companies I work with, they'll do all the packing, the sorting. They bring in a gentleman who will assess things if they want to sell something. In general, most people leave most of the things either to the new buyer or they donate to, say, Goodwill, something like that. Because again, their place they're moving into is usually quite a bit smaller.
Sure.
And so these companies that help with the packing and sorting will also even look at the schematic of their new apartment and to help them to say, that couch just isn't going to work over there. You can't take the dining room table that's 14 feet long. And so those are the things we start talking about the most actually is what am I going to do with the stuff? The next part is, well, am I going to move first and then you're going to sell the house, or am I sell the house then move? Most of the folks I deal with want to sell first because they need the funds from the home to go to the new community. So it all depends on their financial situation, what they're comfortable with. But the majority, I would say, want to sell first, then move. So those are the things we discuss.
You had mentioned the survey that you had conducted with, I'm assuming, with seniors.
Yeah.
Other themes that were common that, aside from the communities in which they were going to, any other themes that that you can call out for us?
Yeah, I mean, I asked some pretty pointed questions. What are their greatest worry? Majority are worried about war, are worried about their grandchildren,
Oh, wow.
believe it or not.
Wow. Yeah.
None of the worries were really about themselves, which is great. Yeah, I mean, very noble of the folks that have grandchildren and children. So we asked those types of questions. What if you did move to a senior community? What how many bedrooms would you like? And the majority wanted 2 bedrooms and a den, maybe a bath and a half, something like that. So those are the questions we asked. What are their greatest fear? Well, I asked that question at many of my seminars, and not many people get it. They think it's money, they think all different things, but it's fear of change. That's number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, going from a known to an unknown. And that is quite daunting as we get older and older. Am I going to fit into the new place? What if I move in and I don't like it? Then what am I going to do? So these are the thought processes going on. And we discuss those. And because I have the knowledge of so many folks that I've helped, I can give them pretty straight answers that most people say, I never looked at it that way. Or I'll have the whole family at the table. We'll all talk about it. And, it's amazing once you get into the emotion behind what they're doing, the fear of change, as opposed to talking about money. We never get to the money because they're not going to move because they're terrified of moving.
Right.
So we need to get to the root of the issue, which is what I said is that fear of change.
Sure. How about the children and or the future caregiver, whatever the case may be, basically? How do you coach them? What are some of the key things they should be that are listening or watching this podcast?
Right.
What are some things they should be focused in on?
Yeah. So for the children, you got to get along with your siblings if there's more than one child. One is typically appointed as a durable power of attorney in most cases, and we deal with a lot of estates also when the folks have passed. So the first thing I'll ask them is do you have any siblings? Yes, I do. Do you all get along? Well, yes, except for one, which is what I hear every time, except for that one. And typically it's the one that lives furthest away who's calling the shots. And then the caregiver sibling is here really getting upset with that sibling because I'm doing all the work and they're telling me what I should do. They're just going to fly in and it's not fair. And so I ask questions about, do you have siblings? Are you getting along? Some will say, yeah, we love each other. We have no fights. Everybody's on the same page. But when I hear they're not on the same page, the first thing I will tell them to do is get an attorney. Get an attorney involved so that you have a third party making these decisions. Otherwise, you're putting the onus on the durable power of attorney that was chosen by the parent, and it's not fair to them because everything they do is question. You should have got more for the house. What do you mean you know, on and on and on. And then I've had many where the siblings no longer talk to each other because of, you shouldn't have done that to mom and dad. I would have done it this way. You did it that way. And they don't talk to each other anymore.
And there might be instances too. There's probably some level of emotional attachment for them as well, because most of the houses they've lived,
Right.
that's where the house where they were probably born and raised in.
Well, you just hit another one.
Yeah.
Just had one last week. There were two siblings. This one said, "Get rid of the house. Let's get it gone." And the other one was crying and can't move forward. The one that can't move forward was the power of attorney. So this one's upset with that one. So each, as I say, sibling, if there are more than one, have different motivations, different emotions. And so I try to sort of be in the middle of it all, try to help them discuss. Sometimes I feel like I'm a psychologist more than a realtor.
Counselor for sure. That
Yes.
makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Any stories that might be compelling to our viewers that that just stands out? Maybe a recent story, maybe a success story of something that kind of, you know, when you go to sleep at night, it makes you feel like, yeah, I've done my job really well.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, because I have helped so many people, I have so many stories, and I could be here for hours telling you about them. Some are funny, some are sad, heartbreaking. But in general, we put on seminars twice a year, and the whole reason we do this is to educate people and give them all the options that are out there. If the folks listen and use the services, things go pretty well. I've had I'd say the majority have pretty much followed our plan and helping outside companies help them downsize and all that. And so, I just had this is kind of heartwarming. It has a little to do with real estate, but not really.
Mhm.
I had a client, she was, I think, 89 years old, 90, something like that. And I walked in the house, and wonderful lady, very just kind, pleasant, and we sat down at the table. And she was from the Japan area.
Okay.
So we talked a little bit, and she said, "I got to tell you a little bit about myself." I said, "Well, go ahead." She said, "I lived on Hiroshima when the bomb was dropped. My sister was 200 yards away and was vaporized in front of her. She was burned almost her entire body." And she told me a little bit the sounds that the bomb made and that it sounded like water swishing around. And then they looked up and they saw a second sun. It was that bright. Well, after that, she then moved back to the United States where some of her relatives were, and they were in an internment camp. So not only she experienced Americans that way over there, she comes here and her whole family's imprisoned. They get out, and then she became an accountant. And this is the thing that struck me. She had nothing bad to say about America. She said, "This is the greatest country to live in. I love this country. It's given me so much." And here I'm thinking this woman should be bitter and full of hate. And that was one of the most heartwarming stories I've ever had since I've been in real estate.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. So to talk, you mentioned the seminars. How would one sign up for those seminars, and maybe
Yeah.
just kind of give where they can go to learn more about the process and what you can provide them?
They can always go to our website. It's brucesteam.com, and you can check there. If somebody somehow heard this before Tuesday, they can certainly sign up. It's free. And we have about 20 senior communities represented there. We have contractors that help with the downsizing. I'll be speaking. And we have Governor Schreiber speaking, and he talks about dementia because his wife Elaine passed away. He wrote a book called My Two Elaines. He's just a wonderful speaker. And then we have somebody talking about downsizing, which is what everybody is really wanting to hear about.
Yeah.
When they leave the seminar and I list their home, they tell me I couldn't have done this unless I went to that seminar. It was so motivational. I didn't know these companies were out there that could help me with the downsizing, that you guys specialize in selling the home and you understand our emotions. And so, and when I run into them after they've moved, and they're usually terrified when I first walk in, they'll say, I should have done this sooner. That's what I hear from almost everybody. So again, you can always go to our website, brucesteam.com, and you can call us at 262-242-6177, and you'll reach my wife, Jean. And we have Erica there, who's wonderful, but all of us are swimming in the same direction.
Bruce Nemovitz, thanks for joining us at the Smart Start podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Navigating the transition to assisted living can be one of the most challenging and delicate conversations families and individuals face. Today, we're joined by Courtney Russell and Derek Nelson from Assisted Living Advocates, who provide support and expertise to those embarking on this journey. Welcome, Courtney and Derek, to the Smart Start podcast.
How you doing? Hello.
Great. It's good to see you both. So tell me a little bit about what got you started with Assisted Living Advocates.
Well, we're both been in the industry for quite a while. I have a long healthcare history. Courtney has a long business history. We decided to combine in the much needed fields of helping people find assisted livings. Far more than we honestly expected, because we are very busy and extremely grateful for the work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any statistics you can provide for the number of people that are in need, just maybe in this community, or, you know, if you have just more national statistics in terms of people looking for assisted living?
I don't know if I have an actual statistic.
We know that the senior population in Milwaukee and Waukesha County, which is a primary area of our coverage, is grown substantially just in the years that we've been doing this. So no, I don't have any hard numbers to give you, but it's significant.
Okay. One of the things that I think that everybody's been touched by, whether it's a family member, a neighbor, somebody who is transitioning from whether they've independent living in their, maybe the home that they've raised a family in for 40, 50 years. Sure. How do you address that in terms of when you meet with clients? Talk me through how you kind of walk through that with a client, or are you, how do you get the referrals too? And these were all really bad questions, so I'm going to, hopefully this will get edited. Let me start over.
We have terrible answers because it really depends. There's a huge range of referral sources that we get directly from the hospital, directly from rehab, families who are just kind of poking around, trying to gauge the temperature of the water, and all of a sudden they're ready.
Okay.
And
senior centers are.
Yeah, that's a huge source of our referrals. So because we see such a wide variety, it's almost impossible to tell you how the average case goes.
Okay.
But someone who's living at home is obviously going to have a lot more of a shocked transition into assisted living.
When somebody's starting the search, say it's do you find that you're usually working with just the client themselves, or is there a family member typically involved in it?
Again, it could be either or. I find that mostly we're working with the families first, and then the individual, we definitely are meeting along the way somewhere in that process. But usually we start with the families. Okay.
And tell me if you had advice to give to those family members as they're looking to, a pretty significant move in their family member's life, their parent, grandparent, whatever the case may be. What are some things they should look for when they're looking for that next home, or potentially the final home for some of these folks?
Well, the first thing I would say is plan ahead.
Yeah.
usually they're coming to us in crisis mode, and then that's when maybe decisions are rushed and maybe the right decision isn't necessarily made. So definitely the sooner we can get involved in the process, the better.
Are there some cues they should be looking for that says, well, now's the time I should start looking?
There's a lot of those, but I think having that conversation with them initially, figuring out their preferences. No one wants to have the conversation. No one wants to have that discussion. It's really unfortunate to how hard it is to have that discussion and have them go, they'll shut down because they aren't ready. They want to stay where they are. And it makes it really tough to ask those questions. But if you can get any kind of preference, because otherwise, like Courtney said, it turns into an emergency, which is not ideal. But it is the vast majority of people that we assist.
And it kind of goes to that question of who wants to surrender their independence, right? Yeah. And at the end of the day, how, that is one of the challenges. Are there counseling? Do you provide any type of counseling for that? And I know that's not really.
No, we are the counselors.
Yeah,
that is
right.
The unfortunate reality is that when the social worker gives our information out in that instance, hey, you cannot go home. So please call this wonderful person, Courtney, and they will walk you through the process. And we do have to have that, a mediation of sorts, guiding them through, okay, here's just the initial steps. And of course, sometimes we find we get ahead of ourselves because we know what the best option is, but they're not ready for it. And if that means they have to go home and find that is their best option, okay, we'll be ready for you when you're, unfortunately back in the hospital, or you've spent too much money on home care and now assisted living is your best option.
Yeah. And I think that in talking to, especially talking to people who are seniors, they tend to take it a little bit slower. The decision-making is probably a little bit longer in terms of the case. We
absolutely want them to be part of the process. We want buy-in.
Yeah.
They're going to be the one moving there, so we definitely want them to know exactly what's happening along the way. We don't want to be planning in front of them and not including them.
Yes.
Yeah, right. And so talk to me a little bit about, okay, what is your ultimate goal with somebody, let's just say, that is just ready to sell their home and wants to get into has a lot of capability still, has a level of independence. What is ultimately your goal for that person specifically? Obviously knowing that as people, whether it's memory care or other things that have already gone down that road, when somebody what is ultimately your goal with trying to find somebody a place to live that still wants to have some level of independence but doesn't want to pay for the home health care, things of that nature? Financial
and care sustainability is the far and away biggest factor in success.
Okay.
Make sure that, one, they can afford, whatever the building's private pay requirement is. And then knowing that the county will take over payments at some point in the instances where not everyone has infinite money.
Right.
Most people come to us with the value of their home and then maybe what's left in their IRA. So $200,000 to $300,000 is a pretty average amount of money that we see people saying, this is what I've got. What do I do with it? And whether that's an independent person or not. So once the financial piece is in place and we know they can afford an option, do they have the right level of care so that if their care needs increase while they're there, are they going to get kicked out? Because certain buildings, if you exceed 28 hours of care per week, it can be as simple as that. You either need to bring in home care to cover the additional time, which now is taking care that was $5,000 a month to $10,000, $15,000. And as with the numbers I gave you before, that's not sustainable for people long term.
Right.
I think keeping them as independent as possible is key, but also having that backup throughout the community. So maybe having a continuum of care for them. So they're independent now, but what's that going to look like in the future?
In the same, because that's one of the things, at least in my personal experience, is trying to keep somebody at least in the same facility. So you're not picking them up and moving them out of others.
The same community, they might have to move to a different part of the building at some point in time, but they're still within that same community. They still have those same people, same friends that can visit them or they can visit and if they get moved.
So what are some of the variations between the different communities that you place them in? Obviously understanding that, whether it's a physical, inability versus memory care, things of that nature. What are some of the different options that one would find in when looking for what makes an ideal place for you to place somebody in? What are you looking for them?
Well, it depends what care they need. Of
Yeah,
course,
right, sure.
I get a lot of what is the best assisted living? And you're like, wow, that is not a question.
You can't. No,
there's no
not
way
such a
for me
thing.
to tell you that.
Yeah,
we have a
truly,
lot
when
of.
You've seen one. You have really seen one assisted living. They're
Yeah.
all so different.
Yeah.
And some of them specialize in just maybe a little bit different, to have a little different niche. And so it's really taking that individual and fitting them with that community because they have that need.
Resources probably being paramount.
I'm an absolutely huge factor.
Yeah.
We've been doing a fair amount of what I'll call pro bono, family care, Title 19 type work, people that are in need, they don't know where to go, and we can help with that. That's an option. There are always choices. Wisconsin is very, very good to its seniors as far as Medicaid reimbursement and getting individuals into the proper level of housing. You will have less choices, but you will have choices, which is more than I can say for, say, Illinois or Iowa.
What are some of the misconceptions about assisted living and care that you see out there? Or some myths that you'd like to implode?
Dispel.
Well, I think a lot of times families think that their loved one needs a skilled nursing, that they need to have a nurse on site all the time.
Every week.
Yeah. And that's not the case.
Yeah.
I think as assisted livings have, I don't know, over the years, they've just gotten to be able to provide more care than they used to. So now somebody who might have been in a skilled nursing 10 years ago can now be in an assisted living.
Yeah, that's primarily thanks to partnerships with home health care. You can get a little bit of what would be called skilled assistance in your day-to-day. It's not as much as you would receive at a skilled environment, but someone who had a wound that would usually have to stay in a facility can now receive a little bit of assistance at an assisted living, receiving activities, being social, having a lot more fun in their day-to-day, and not having to share a room or a bathroom. I mean, these are just the unfortunate realities of being in a skilled environment that we try and avoid if at all possible.
Of course, when we were trying to place my mother, I would have loved to have worked with assisted living advocates.
Thank you.
But one of the things that I've noticed, and maybe you can help me out too, in terms of some of the things that if for some reason somebody's just doing it on their own, they haven't come to their senses and have decided to hire assisted living advocates. I recall one of the things when we would walk into certain facilities, we'd notice it's like, there are no residents in the hallway. What are some of the cues, maybe other cues that might, that somebody may look for, if they are just touring a facility on their own?
Oh, again, it depends. A lot of times people aren't in the hallway for good reason. They shouldn't be out there. They need to either be in their room where we know that they're in a wheelchair and making safe transfer decisions, or they're out at activities in a supervised environment. So at a lower level of care, if you didn't see people out in the activity room, that potentially could be a red flag. Yeah. But other places, it would be good if they were not in the hallway. And then memory care, all bets are off. That's my background, and I couldn't tell you from one day to the next how that's going to look, or what you're expecting to see, because it's going to be different every single day.
And I don't want to put you on the spot because I know you have clients too, as the facilities themselves. But one of the things, the challenges that I see with my mother and with my mother-in-law is staffing.
Yeah.
What are some of the, are those concerns, or are those things you address as well when you're working with making sure those placements are made?
We do. We definitely are looking for those communities that are not using agency or like a rotation of people coming in to an agency staffing, so that they have their own caregivers coming in and it's their employees. Yeah. So that's a big one that we look for sure.
Yeah,
and
we know
consistency.
We know that there's always going to be a little bit of turnover. It's just a fact of life, especially at the unfortunately underpaid CNA rate of say 15 to 20 on the high end, kind of an hour. So you're going to see a little bit of turnaround. They're obviously an underappreciated workforce, and we'd love to see more, pay getting to those people to increase. And that's where we see the best success are the buildings that appreciate and show financially that they appreciate their caregivers on a daily basis. You feel that.
Yeah.
You feel that energy. you'll see someone on their phone and you're like, man, I cannot tell if that person is on a break or if that person truly is just not doing their job. And it's unfortunate, but you have to go with your gut. We are checking the state licensure to make sure that nothing egregious has happened with their caregivers. We like to think that the buildings, we get called in a lot ahead of, listen, something happened. State was called in this instance. We just want you to be aware of what happened.
And the buildings that do that are doing a good job. At
Yeah,
letting us
transparency.
know. Yes,
is
absolutely.
huge.
Yeah, right.
So that when a family member who's really savvy looks up the building, like, wow, it says here that yes, and I know all about that, and I can, thankfully, they cued me on that. It's not as big a deal as it seems, or that is a deal breaker. Let's look at something else.
So let's take some time here now you've said you've been super busy, which is fantastic.
Absolutely.
How about a couple of, or one or two real quick success stories that you just want to tell that, when you go to sleep at night, it just makes you feel really good that you've made the right, you're doing the right thing.
I got one.
Go for it.
Okay. I just had a gentleman calling around frantically to facilities in this area. He thought he needed skilled care, classic. And his dad was in Connecticut, and he wanted to move him back near him. It was just a bad situation. He was bedbound. They thought he needed to be in bed 24/7. He didn't. It was absolutely not the case. We got him over here today. He is at a beautiful facility. I won't say it. I don't want to imply any bias.
Sure.
But not only is he very happy, but they got him out today in his wheelchair, and he sent me a video. He was singing to some song I don't recognize because I'm too young. But I just couldn't believe it. From someone that was getting round the clock barrier cream applied to him so that he can be in bed 24/7 to singing and clearly happy, upright, engaging in life in a different way. It just made my heart so happy. So it's little stuff like that.
You tell me it's a Beatles song.
There's no way it was the Beatles. I would have known that one.
How about you, Corey?
Well, I think it goes along the same thing, is that we find a lot of people have been isolated for so long. So when they get to the community and they realize, like, oh my gosh, I should have done this 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And now they have a friend who's checking in on them, who's saying, hey, come on, like, let's go down to lunch together. And, she's not here. I wonder why she's not here. Let's go check on her and see if she wants to come play cards. So it's getting that socialization again, which to me, when we go in the buildings and now we see them because we're on a tour with another family, that's kind of when I find that that's a great success.
Yeah, we get a lot of times, well, mom isn't very social. She just, and it's like, yeah, she's not social because she lives at home and doesn't engage with anyone. How could she be social? And then gets in that environment and just blossoms. And you're like, okay, great. That you see them out there playing dominoes or something. Like
bingo.
Bingo is that's huge.
That's a big one. You either love it or you hate it.
It's very hit or miss.
Yeah. How about some, and again, I don't want to say just disasters, but what are some of the best practices? Again, we kind of mentioned it of, having that conversation early, but any examples of things that, geez, I just wish they would have done this a little differently and we would have been a lot better? Or is it all basically ends up being they're just too late to the game and then it becomes a rush? Or are there any things that you just see from whether it's the decision making or whether it's the sibling rivalries that sometimes play into this?
We get a lot of that.
Yeah.
It's a race to figure out who can find a solution as quickly as possible.
Yes.
Like, oh, that probably wasn't helping.
Maybe there's a reality show somewhere.
Oh, please, no. That sounds terrible.
Yeah.
That's already fast enough as it is. Yeah, it depends. A lot of people will pick a building because it's pretty. They walk in, the shiny nickel just gets all that attention. You're like, wow, this must be a great building. Maybe, or maybe it's terrible.
Yeah.
A lot of really great buildings are awful, and a lot of buildings that sure could use a fresh coat of paint have exceptional care and are some of my favorites. And people walk away from those because they're like, well, my mom won't like this. That's great. That's your personal choice, but I can tell you it's better than the other option.
We have to say, no, come on, like, really, you should see this building. And then when they get in there, the caregivers are saying hello to them. They see them out there. They see them doing the cares and say, yeah, wow, I'm glad you told me that we should see this.
Right. So it's not just the shiny penny, because how many people are coming and engaging with you, or is that kind of the the front. All the money was put in on the
Well, I think sometimes they're built for the kids,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
To impress us.
yeah.
And because we're part of that decision making.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I don't know a ton of 80-year-olds that are really impressed by marble countertops and hardwood floors. That's for the kids.
Yeah,
That's
right.
not.
Open concept.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they love that
Sure.
shiplap everywhere.
So, if we were to, how would you suggest one start if they were to contact assisted living advocates? What's the best way to get a hold of you, and what's the best way to follow up? And
Yeah, they just have to call us, and we're gonna tailor the approach to their specific situation. It's every approach that we have is radically different than the next, so we can't say one way is better than the other. But once they reach out, they're in great hands, and we'll take care of it for them. Also, use the word hire before. We don't like to use that word because we don't charge anything. This is a totally free service. We get reimbursed by the buildings where we place them, so we treat it as a real estate model type approach.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But yeah, totally free service, which is a huge plus for a lot of people. I like to remind people.
ALAcares.com.
LA, say that again.
ALAcares.com.
And is there phone numbers
Sure.
for those that aren't computer savvy?
414-520-0091.
And 414-430-0153.
There you go.
Anything you want to address that I may not have touched on that you think is important for our audience to hear about?
Oh my gosh. I don't know,
I
just
just
like
like
general advice. Kiwis are great. I love kiwis. No, I don't think they're an underappreciated fruit. Take a Stop the Bleed course. It's way more likely you'll encounter a bleeding individual in your life than you will a CPR patient. What else?
How to reduce falls is a big one too.
Oh, sure.
Last.
They aren't,
But I would just like to say that I found that this is my passion. Not like I've gone through this with my mother, and I had my own business before this, and it was a great business, and I loved it. But when I finally said, "Oh my gosh, I would do this for free," I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is what I was meant to do." And we made a lot of mistakes with my mom. So if I can prevent families from making mistakes along the way, then that's what we're here for.
It's amazing what just being of service can be to people too, and that's exactly what you do. And I appreciate everybody appreciates exactly what you're doing. So, Derek and Courtney, thanks for joining us on the Smart Start podcast. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.